I thought that a weekend to myself would make things better. A short trip, a few days away from the stuffiness of my cramped apartment, the unanswered phone calls, and the loneliness that stalked my return home. My mother said she had booked a train ticket, prepared for me to take a girl's vacation to heal from what I had been through. You'll feel different, trust me, Lauren. We'll have time together like old times. I nodded, holding that small hope in my heart, dreaming of the blue sea, the salty air, and the sound of girls' laughter echoing throughout the trip. That morning, I woke up very early, the air still slightly chilly with the spring sea breeze. I dragged my small suitcase out of the house, telling myself not to think about the past, about the losses, about having to start everything over at an age when my friends were all settled. There was only excitement in my heart, mixed with vague anxiety. I arrived at Portsmouth train station when the mist still covered the old streets. The sea breeze blew strongly, carrying the smell of salt and fresh grass. Looking around, I saw my mother and sister Evelyn standing on the platform. Next to them were two little children, Harper and Miles, their eyes dark, their hair disheveled, clinging to their mother's shirt. I paused for a moment. Maybe they came to see me off, I consoled myself, though my heart was starting to feel uneasy. Before I could say hello, my mother came over, gave me a quick hug, and shoved a large bag and an old blue stroller into my hands. Please hold this for me. Evelyn and I have to catch the train early. Something came up. Can you watch the kids for me for a while? Before I could understand what was going on, Evelyn interrupted, her voice urgent. Lauren, I'm really sorry. We have to leave right away. Jim's work is out of town. Please bear with me for a day or two. I'll send you the schedule and instructions via text message. My mother smiled gently, but her eyes couldn't hide her avoidance. You're still the most resourceful little sister I've ever known. I trust you'll do well, right? Everything happened so fast. Before I could ask why, before I could refuse, Harper grabbed my hand, Miles hugged my leg, and Mom and Evelyn hurriedly dragged my luggage onto the train. They waved and smiled as if everything was fine, as if I was still the little darling Lauren of all those years, always ready to take on any responsibility for others. I stood there, silent amid the sound of the platform loudspeaker, the two children looking at me with eyes that were both unfamiliar and expectant. My suitcase lay abandoned, waiting for a trip that now had no one to accompany me. Memories of girls' weekends came flooding back, the days when I was a kid, my mother and sister taking me out for ice cream, sitting on the grass listening to their stories. But those days were long gone, replaced by a reality where I was no longer the center, where my presence seemed like a backup plan. The initial confusion gave way to a sense of loss, then slowly to a dull sadness. I looked around, trying to find a rational explanation, but deep down I knew the weekend had never really existed. I took the kids to a bench on the side of the platform, sitting there trying to sort things out in my head. Harper asked me, Auntie Lauren, where's my mom? I smiled awkwardly. Mommy and Aunt Evelyn have something important to do, so let's have a special day together. Miles sat quietly, looking at his shoes, as if he would be left behind again if he let his guard down. I pulled them closer, checked the diaper bag, and tried to figure out what to do next. No words, no clear instructions. All I had were the two kids and the feeling of being trapped in a predetermined scenario. A moment later, I pulled out my phone, intending to call my mom or Evelyn to clarify the situation. But before I could dial, a text message from my mom popped up. You'll be great. Just breathe. I read it over and over again, feeling like it was more empty consolation than genuine encouragement. There was no apology, no explanation, just a gentle yet heavy placement, the way my mom had always done, turning expectations into obligations and calling it love. I sat silently watching the train gradually disappear behind the rows of old stations. The spring sun began to rise, shining a soft light on the silver hair of the elderly sitting nearby. I wondered, have I ever dared to say no to things like this? Have I ever truly made a decision for myself, or have I been just a follower all these years, patching up the gaps left by others? For the first time in my life, I felt the bitterness of betrayal, coated in the sugar of friendship. I understood that resentment doesn't come out all at once, but rather grows silently inside me when I'm seen as a backup plan. I wrapped my arms around Harper and Miles, whispering to myself, maybe it's time for me to change. And in that moment, in that old train station, I knew a new chapter had begun in my life, even if it wasn't what I expected. Nothing in the world can prepare you for being suddenly left with two toddlers, especially when your own emotional wounds are still raw. I had imagined a quiet night, perhaps with some trouble falling asleep thinking about life, but what I got was toddler chaos, laughter, crying, and cartoon music echoing throughout my small apartment. I walked Harper and Miles back to the apartment, feeling awkward and amused. The living room, which was only big enough for one person, looked like a war zone. Coats on the couch, diaper bags open, cookies strewn across the carpet, and a stroller taking up half the aisle. I turned on the TV and picked a random children's cartoon, hoping it would distract them from the strangeness, but within minutes Harper was asking for orange juice and Miles was upset about losing his favorite toy car. Both children were strangers to me. I knew their names and their routines, but I had never babysat for more than an hour. My awkwardness was evident as I struggled to find a place for clean diapers and set out a quick dinner of macaroni and cheese and sliced apples. Harper whispered questions about her mother, her eyes innocent and aching. I thought about the loneliness I felt after losing my unborn child, a dull, aching pain that had been there for months, and now it came flooding back as I stood in the kitchen, preparing a meal for the two children. As the evening wore on, things seemed to get harder. Miles cried constantly, despite my attempts to comfort him with books, toys, and even letting him rest his head on my lap, as my mother had done for me when I was a baby. Harper was glued to the TV, not saying a word, and I felt helpless and lost in my own home. Every cry, every sigh, Miles made me remember the night after the miscarriage, lying in my room, listening to the refrigerator, feeling empty inside. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Edith, the kind old neighbor, appeared with a steaming pot of stew. "I hear you crying. Can you help, Lauren?" She smiled, her eyes more sympathetic than curious. I felt rescued from my own exhaustion. Edith placed the pot on the counter, helped me portion it into bowls, and then gently told me about the years she had raised her children alone after her husband died. Parenting, especially when it's unexpected, is not perfect. There were days when I just sat there and cried with my children. Those words made me feel less inadequate. When Edith came home, I started making a mental list of things no one tells you about suddenly becoming the breadwinner of your family. That patience doesn't come naturally, that you have to forget your ego, that no one is coming to the rescue. It's just you and your unfinished dreams to mend. The world grew quiet, but Miles was still not asleep. He was sobbing, his face red, his little hands clutching my shirt. I was almost overcome by the exhaustion that stretched from my mind to my body. In the moment when it felt like everything was about to collapse, I found myself humming an old lullaby, the one my mother used to sing to me when I was scared or lonely. "Go to sleep, my child, I am with you, though the storm outside is howling." Strangely, Miles calmed down, his cries fading and then stopping. He pressed his face against my chest, breathing in the strange yet familiar warmth. Harper pulled the covers up and whispered, "Auntie Lauren sings better than TV." I hugged the two children, tears welling up in my eyes without realizing it. This was probably the first time I felt truly needed by someone since the loss. The night deepened. I lay quietly on the sofa, the two children already sound asleep in bed, breathing evenly. In the darkness, I could hear my own heartbeat, slow, restless, but strangely warm. I began to wonder, was it really just helping out for a few days, as my mother and sister had said? Or was there something more that I had yet to realize? Around midnight, when I had just fallen asleep, the phone suddenly vibrated. It was an unknown number, a woman's voice in a hurry. "I'm Melody. Please, are my children safe with you?" I sat up, my heart pounding. I had no idea that after just one day, this story would no longer be about simple babysitting. A cold wind blew through the crack in the door, carrying with it suspicion and bad premonitions for the days ahead. There are truths that only come out when you're so exhausted that you can't lie anymore, to others or to yourself. Last night, after a surprise call from Melody, I lay awake until almost dawn. My mind was racing with questions. Who is Melody? Why is she calling me in the middle of the night? And is everything I've heard about her, the stories from my mother, from Evelyn, really true? The next morning, I texted Melody at her number, agreeing to meet at a small restaurant near the Old Quarter. I chose a table in a secluded corner, where the sunlight filtered through the glass windows and reflected off my hot coffee, while the lingering worry lingered in my mind. Over the years, whenever Melody's name was mentioned, I had assumed I understood. Melody is unstable, my mother would say, with a tinge of pity and judgment. People are weak and give up easily. Evelyn had also said she chose to leave the kids, Lauren. Don't get yourself into unnecessary trouble. But my intuition, the one I usually ignore, was ringing loudly today, telling me that things weren't quite as they seemed. Melody appeared, thin, her face tired, but her eyes bright. She sat down across from me, her hands clasped together on the table. "Thank you for meeting me, Lauren. I know this isn't easy." Her voice was low and broken, both anxious and seemingly filled with quiet determination. I nodded, keeping my composure. I didn't know what I was going to hear, only that my heart was beating uncontrollably. "You've heard about me," Melody began. "It's not all good." I looked at her, saying nothing, waiting. She continued, her voice shaking. "I didn't abandon the children. I was forced to leave before I was strong enough to protect myself. I was very sick, remaining hospitalized for a long time. During that time, all my rights to Harper and Miles were taken away by the court, based on accusations I never had a chance to defend. Evelyn, she took advantage of my weakest moment to make me an unstable mother." I sat still, Melody's words peeling back layers of dust from what I thought I knew. I remembered the years when my family had used the excuse of protecting the children to justify keeping Melody out of the picture, the sad look in Harper's eyes when she mentioned her mother, the times Evelyn avoided me whenever I asked about the past. Melody pulled a stack of papers from her purse, court papers, printouts of emails she had sent to her attorney, letters to Harper and Miles that had never been sent. "I don't want to get the kids back out of spite," she whispered. "I just want to be their mother, to hold them, to watch them grow up." She pushed the papers toward me quietly. "Look, Lauren. It's not what they say." I shook as I turned the pages, affidavits, hospital notices, legal documents, cold emails from my sister to her lawyer. The italics on the pages seemed to betray the coldness of the family I had once trusted so completely. The more I read, the heavier my heart felt. Everything I had grown up with, my mother's words, Evelyn's whispers in my ear, had turned out to be only part of the story, the part they wanted me to believe. "Melody, why did you come to me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm despite the turmoil inside me. "Because I think you're the only one who can understand what it's like to be deprived of a mother, albeit in a different way. And because I know, Lauren, that you're the only one in the family who has the conscience to ask questions, instead of just repeating what you've been told. I didn't know what to say, so I just looked out the window. Spring raindrops began to fall, creating a misty mist in the middle of the old town. I suddenly found myself lost between two worlds. On one side was my biological family, where I had always played the role of the youngest child, never knowing how to rebel. On the other side was Melody, a mother cut off from her children, desperately calling for help. My loyalty began to waver. "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice lower than I intended. Melody just shook her head. "I don't dare ask for too much. Just tell me if the kids are okay, and, if possible, give me a chance, just a chance to prove I'm a good mother." I promised to think about it, knowing full well that I was caught in a battle from which there was no turning back. Saying goodbye to Melody, I walked out of the restaurant, clutching the documents as if they were the weight of the truth. The cold spring rain hit my face, stripping away the layers of falsehood I had unconsciously built around myself. Sometimes, to begin the healing process, you have to be brave enough to look the ugly truth in the face, even if it makes you afraid of your own flesh and blood. That night, when I got home, I lay still on the sofa, my mind spinning with a series of thoughts. I asked myself, what does it mean to be an adult? Is it to repeat the story of the previous generation, or to dare to write a new chapter? Even though I know it can destroy everything I once called peaceful? The answers still hung in the air between the sound of rain falling outside the window and the steady breathing of the two children in the bedroom. But I knew that after today, I would no longer be the same Lauren. There are late nights, when the world outside has fallen silent, that people can truly face themselves. I sat alone in the kitchen, the darkness covering everything with a heavy layer of silence. The cup of coffee gradually cooled next to Melody's documents. The rain still drizzled outside the window as if reminding me that time waits for no one. I flipped through each page, my heart filled with a series of unanswered questions. When I was a child, I tried to stand up to my mother once. Just once, when I said no to something she imposed, just because I felt I was being treated unfairly. The memory is still fresh. The cold silence that lasted for months, the wordless dinners, the silent, reproachful looks that I will never forget. From then on, I taught myself to be obedient, to please everyone, to accept the role of the bridge in the family, even though my heart was never truly at peace. But this time was different. The truth before me, the papers Melody had given me, the emails, the testimony, would not allow me to turn a blind eye any longer. I read and reread, trying to find a loophole that could justify my mother or Evelyn, but the more I read, the more cruel and cold it seemed. Melody had lost her child not only to illness, but also to the selfishness and control of the very people I called family. The phone rang, the screen showing Edith's name. I sighed and pressed answer. "Lauren, is everything okay?" Edith's voice was soft and warm. I hesitantly told her about what I had discovered, about Melody, about the documents, about the fear of realizing the truth could turn my life upside down. Edith listened, then gently told me her own story. Once, she broke the family rule because she couldn't stand seeing a neighbor's kid being mistreated. The whole family turned their backs on her, calling her a traitor, but she didn't regret it. Sometimes standing up isn't brave, Lauren. It's just the only way to respect yourself. Edith's words made me feel a little lighter. I thought of Melody, of Harper and Miles, the two children sleeping peacefully in their room, unaware that their lives were being decided by adults who lied and concealed. I knew that if I continued to choose the safe side, I would never forgive myself. Just then, the phone beeped with a text message. It was Melody. "My lawyer wants to talk, but I'm scared. If you don't feel okay, then that's fine. Just say the kids are okay and I'll be fine." I typed and typed but failed to send any reply. Fear fought with compassion. Helping Melody meant confronting my family. Thinking of my mother, of Evelyn, I suddenly felt smaller and weaker than ever. Then, very quietly, I texted Melody back a simple sentence. I will help. But I'm scared. Just 5 words, but it was as if I had crossed a threshold that had eluded me all my life. My heart pounded, my throat tightened, but at the same time I felt a strange strength within me, the strength of honesty. Just then, the phone screen lit up again. It was my mother. The message was short. Sunday dinner. Just family. Don't bring up the past. The summons was the same as always, as if all that I had just discovered had never existed. Mother still controlled everything with silence and denial. I sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring at my cold coffee, listening to the rain that continued to fall. For the first time in my life, I realized that standing up for others could mean standing alone, against the people I thought loved me the most. But sometimes, choosing to help someone isn't brave. It's just the only way to live with yourself. As I went to bed, I watched my 2 children sleep soundly, silently promising myself that no matter what happened, I would never back down again. That night, the sound of the rain became the soundtrack to an irreversible change. And I knew that tomorrow, everything would start to be different, not just for me, but for this entire family. They say that family dinners can bring people together. But on Sunday nights, sitting at my mother's dining table, I see clearly how wide the gap between people of the same blood can be. Disparate lives, each in their own corner, connected only by unwritten rules that everyone knows, but no one dares to name. My mother's house smelled of roast beef, mashed potatoes, and fresh apple pie. She was busy in the kitchen, setting the table with a suffocating perfectionism. The dining table was long, the table was white, the candles were scented, and everything was arranged in perfect order. At first glance, one might think this was a typical Midwestern family, traditional, close-knit, and impeccably perfect. But if you paid close attention, you would see that the atmosphere was woven from raised eyebrows, averted glances, and a heavy silence that hung over every word. I sat Harper and Miles down at the opposite ends of the table, smiling encouragingly at them, knowing they could sense the awkwardness. Edith had been invited as the guest of honor, but really to cushion the long silences. As soon as she sat down, she quickly told a funny story about her school days, which made Harper laugh, and the atmosphere lightened a little. But then my mother turned around, her eyes steady and her voice slightly raised. Lauren, I must say, you've grown up a lot. You're really good at taking care of the kids. I'm so happy. I forced a smile, replying with a polite thank you. But inside, the words were like a needle stabbing into my most vulnerable place. Mom always praised me for being good, never really listening to me. Evelyn sat opposite, eyes glued to her phone, fingers scrolling nonstop. I noticed she never raised her head, avoiding eye contact with me. The meal began, knives and forks clanking against plates, creating a strangely tense soundtrack. Mom started talking about Evelyn's work, asking about Harper's school, then suddenly moving on to the new dessert she had learned. No one mentioned Melody, or the past few days, or anything really important. It was like an old play that everyone knew the lines for, except today I didn't feel like playing my part. I tried to break the silence with the simplest, gentlest sentence possible. Harper, do you remember your mother Melody? Harper stopped and looked at me, her little eyes shining with anticipation. And is Mom coming back with me? There was a moment of silence that seemed to last an eternity. My mother looked startled, then smiled and changed the subject to our upcoming beach vacation, telling me about how Evelyn had been afraid of the waves as a child. Evelyn was still staring at the phone, pretending not to hear anything. Edith spoke again, telling a funny story about cats and dogs in the neighborhood, but this time no one paid attention. The already awkward atmosphere became even heavier. I felt my throat tighten and every breath became difficult. The meal passed in a blur of conversation, forced smiles, and evasive glances. When everyone was about to stand up, I couldn't stand it any longer and blurted out. Why can't Melody be a part of Harper and Miles' lives? Is there a real reason, or is it just that Mom doesn't want to face the truth? The air froze for a moment. Mom slammed her spoon down on the table, her eyes flashing with anger and fear that I had rarely seen. She tried to keep her voice calm. "Lauren, this dinner is about keeping the peace. I don't want to talk about the past anymore. Don't mess things up." I looked straight into my mother's eyes, daring to hold them for more than a beat for the first time. Evelyn looked up, gave me a warning glance, then quickly bent down to collect the plates. Harper and Miles sat silently, watching it all without saying a word. The atmosphere was broken. The cracks in the family's unified front were evident, although everyone quickly filled them in with other stories, fake smiles, and thanks for the delicious meal. I helped Edith clear the table, my hands shaking with fear and anger. Evelyn came closer, leaned over to my ear, and whispered in a low voice, "Don't start something you can't finish." I watched Evelyn's back, feeling numb with loneliness. It turned out that just by asking a simple question, I had been cut off from the whole group. But even so, I knew I couldn't continue pretending, because the truth, no matter how ugly, had to be called by its name. That night, I left my mother's house, my heart heavy with sadness and determination. All the old models were collapsing, and I knew that I would have to walk this journey almost alone. Some nights, the small town seemed to fall into a deep silence, save for the steady patter of rain on the windows and the yellow kitchen light that filled every corner of the apartment. I sat surrounded by a jumble of papers on the kitchen table, emails, copies of court records, Melody's hastily scribbled notes. Harper and Miles were long asleep in the next room, and all the sounds had died down, leaving only my own breathing and the constant buzz of questions. I remembered Edith's words during one of her visits, gentle yet haunting, "You cannot heal what you refuse to name." Those words kept ringing in my head, like a reminder that would not allow me to stop halfway. If I only knew the pain but did not dare to name it by its name, would I ever truly overcome it? I began to go through each document Melody had given me, examining every punctuation mark, every line, checking the dates. Suddenly, a strange detail caught my eye. A legal agreement was missing Melody's final signature, but it had my mother's signature. Another form was dated to the court on a day when I knew Melody was still in the hospital. How could she have signed a document while lying in a hospital bed, not fully conscious? I went back through my emails, checking each item, finding a series of unusually overlapping dates, and one document even lacked an attorney's signature. Unsure, I texted Melody. A few minutes later, she called back, her voice tense and hopeful. "Lauren, did you find something?" I said briefly, hearing a long silence on the other end, then a sigh of relief. "You know, I've been feeling crazy for the past few years, because no one believes anything I say." I told Melody to send back any originals she could, then took the initiative for the first time to suggest connecting with June, the lawyer Melody had mentioned many times, but I had always been hesitant to meet. June responded to my email within a few hours and arranged a video call that same night. I didn't know what to expect, but my heart was filled with both fear and relief as I realized that it was time to bring everything to light. When we connected, June appeared with short hair, a calm smile, and sharp but not cold eyes. She asked me about every detail, listened patiently, and then said, "This isn't the first time I've seen this kind of manipulation. But in this case, you should be mentally prepared, because relatives can sometimes be your biggest opponents." While June was reviewing the papers, I called Edith, a new habit I developed when I was feeling overwhelmed. "Lauren, Every family has secrets, she said evenly over the phone. But only those who confront their secrets have the chance to rewrite their own story. I told her about my doubts, my new discoveries. Edith just whispered, "You've come this far, don't look back. Whatever happens, keep your faith in the truth." As the night wore on, it became increasingly clear that there was no turning back. I couldn't pretend I hadn't known what I discovered. I turned on my computer, did some more research, and then got a call back from June. She appeared on the screen, her expression more serious than before. "Lauren, I've reviewed everything. There is a serious legal error in this file. The papers your mother and sister filed with the court are not only missing signatures, but also have incorrect dates and contents. If they come to light, the entire custody agreement could be overturned." I was stunned for a moment, both happy and scared. For years, Melody had been robbed of her motherhood because of carefully hidden legal loopholes. June looked straight at me and asked, "If you are willing to testify, all of this can be brought to court. Are you ready?" I clenched my fists, my heart pounding. In that moment, I knew I couldn't go back to my old life, couldn't continue playing the family pleaser role by staying silent. I had to choose what kind of family I wanted to belong to, a family of truth, even if it hurt, or a family of secrets and insecurities that never got a name. That night, I did not sleep. The rain continued to fall outside the window, as if washing away the layers of dust I had built up over the years. And I knew that when dawn came, this journey would take a decisive turn that I could not avoid. I used to think that being a bridge in the family was something noble, even a mission. Growing up between my mother and my sister, I was used to patching up cracks, keeping everyone happy, accepting concessions instead of speaking up for myself. But as I grew older, I realized it's easy to build bridges for others, but setting boundaries for yourself is the real challenge. That evening, I took Harper and Miles to the park near our house, taking the opportunity to let the children breathe in the fresh air before it got dark. Mom sat on a wooden bench, her hands knitting quickly, her eyes never leaving the scarf she was working on. I pushed the two children on the swing, laughter echoing in the wind. Everything seemed peaceful, but inside me there were hidden waves waiting to explode. I gathered all my courage and gently started a conversation with my mother. "Mom, I still think about Melody a lot. Maybe we should reconsider things, give her a chance to be closer to Harper and Miles." Mom did not look up, still knitting steadily. "It's all clear, Lauren. Melody chose to leave, and coming back now will only complicate things. This family is already at peace." I knew she was just repeating what she had said all those years ago, but this time it sounded cold and distant. Standing by the swing, I thought about all the times I had swallowed injustice just to avoid arguments, just to keep everyone happy, and realized what I had given up. Just then, Melody appeared at the entrance to the park. She was there for a brief, court-ordered visit. Harper and Miles saw their mother and rushed toward her, their cries of "Mom, Mom," echoing across the playground. Melody threw her arms around the children, her face a mixture of happiness and pain. I stood there watching, my throat closing in on me. My mother silently observed, then suddenly turned to me, her voice small but sharp. "See? It just makes things worse, Lauren. Everything would have been fine if you hadn't tried to change the past." I bit my lip, not wanting to argue. I knew she had never forgiven Melody, nor did she really want to. The peace my mother maintained was actually a false peace, built on silence, on the pain of others. After Melody said goodbye to her two children, she approached me, her eyes filled with gratitude and worry. "Lauren, are you going to speak up in court? I know it will be hard for you, but I don't want to go against everyone alone." I hesitated. A series of thoughts ran through my head. If I testify, it means confronting my mother, confronting Evelyn. It means drawing the final line between me and my old family. But looking into Melody's sad eyes, I knew there are truths that if I don't say, no one will say it for me. I nodded, as softly as a whisper. I will speak up. At that moment, Nancy stood up, put aside her knitting, and approached, her face no longer able to hide her anger. If you choose to side with her, you will not only betray me, but also this family. Her voice was sharp as a knife, her eyes piercing me. I felt a chill run down my spine, but this time I didn't back down. I looked straight at my mother, no promises, no apologies. On the way home, I suddenly understood. For years, I thought that being a bridge meant maintaining peace and love. But in fact, there are boundaries that need to be set up to protect the truth and self-respect. Otherwise, I would only continue the old cycle of silence and hurt. That night, I sat by the window, listening to the insects in the park and thinking about tomorrow. Peace built on silence is never true peace. I knew that from today on, my life would belong to the kind of family I dared to choose, an honest family, even if it may not be perfect, but no longer hiding or avoiding the truth. People often think that being brave means being loud and confrontational, about stepping out into the open and asserting that you are right. But sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is simply not playing the same game, not turning a blind eye, not continuing to nod silently for fear of offending someone. That Sunday night, I realized that sometimes standing up is not about being applauded, but just so you can look yourself in the mirror and find a little peace at the end of the day. I sat alone at my small desk, the sky outside the window dark, the streetlights casting faint streaks of light on the walls. Harper and Miles were asleep, occasionally turning over in the next room. In front of me was my computer, the screen glowing with unfinished words, the witness statement June needed to submit to the court. I wrote it over and over again, each time filled with old memories of my childhood as the meekest of the youngest, of the heavy Sunday dinners where everyone had to pretend to be happy, of the one time I dared to speak up and was ignored for months, of the way my mother and Evelyn always tried to cover up the truth with silence and forced smiles. I cried silently as I typed. There are some pains that only really hit home when you have to name them. I remembered what Edith had said last week. Standing up for what's right may not bring applause, but it does bring peace at night. Tonight, I didn't expect anyone to understand, didn't expect anyone to acknowledge me. I just wanted to be me for once. When I finished the statement, I sat there in silence for a long time. I felt a mixture of fear and pride, relief and pain. I sent the draft to June with a note. If you need me to go to court, I am ready. June called back immediately, her voice firm yet warm. I know you've done the hardest thing today. We'll get through this together, Lauren. Don't be afraid. A moment later, Melody came over, holding a bouquet of wildflowers, her face filled with gratitude and concern. We sat together in the small kitchen, not saying much. Melody quietly held my hand, tears rolling down her cheeks. No matter how things end, I can't thank you enough. No one believed my story until you spoke up. We shared that moment of quiet hope and fear, two women, each with her own pain, clinging to each other for rare comfort. I realized new bonds were beginning to form, fragile but more real than all the false pieces I had tried to maintain. When Melody left, I returned to my desk and checked my inbox. A series of messages from Evelyn popped up, starting with a plea. Lauren, please don't do this. You have no idea how heartbroken Mom will be. I'm begging you, just this once, don't push our family any further away. I read, my heart heavy, but not as shaken as before. Evelyn continued to text, this time angrily. Do you really want to stand with someone who abandoned their child? You'll destroy everything, Lauren. If you do, don't expect me to forgive you. I hung up the phone and looked out the window. The streetlights still cast a yellow glow on the small street, and a gentle breeze rustled the trees outside the balcony. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Even though I was alone now, even though it was dark and quiet outside, I felt a strange peace inside me that I had never felt before. Perhaps for the first time, I allowed myself to be proud of myself, not because I had pleased someone, but because I had been true to my own heart. Finally, I pressed submit on the affidavit, knowing full well that this moment was the point of no return. There are lines that, once crossed, there is no turning back. But I was no longer afraid. The phone rang with Evelyn's last message. If you do that, don't expect me to forgive you. I sat silently for a long time, letting the tears roll down my cheeks. Not sadness, but a peaceful sadness, sadness for the past, for what was lost, and for the maturity I had just achieved. I looked out the window again, watching the city sink into the peaceful night. For the first time in years, I felt strong enough to move forward, despite the unknown. They say the truth will set you free. But no one ever told me about the first step of that journey, about the feeling of my feet hitting the cold floor, about the pounding of my heart in my chest as I faced my greatest fear, telling what I knew, knowing full well that once I spoke, nothing would ever be the same again. The morning was gray, thick clouds blanketing the neighborhood, everything bathed in a pale, heavy light. I sat huddled on a cold plastic chair in the waiting area of the local courthouse. The smell of cheap coffee, the click of shoes on the floor, the low whispers and worried looks of strangers, all blended into a chaotic picture I never thought I would be the main character. Melody sat next to me, squeezing my hand as if to give me some courage. June, Melody's lawyer, walked steadily, her demeanor calm as a rock in the midst of rough waves. She came closer, whispering into both of our ears. Just breathe. The courtroom is not the ideal place to seek justice, but the truth still has its weight. Lauren, today you just need to tell me everything you know, no more, no less. I nodded, my throat dry. Near the door, my mother sat upright, her hands clasped together, her face trying to look unconcerned, but her eyes constantly glancing at me. Evelyn stood against the wall, her cold eyes avoiding contact, her lips pressed together until they were pale. Between them and me now was a gap larger than any I had ever known. I remember the one time when I was a child and witnessed my mother and my aunt arguing fiercely about something old. I stood behind the door, my heart pounding, wishing everything would be over so that everyone could laugh and talk like normal. At that time, I kept quiet, telling myself, don't get involved, don't do anything, it's better for everyone. But this time, I was no longer the shy little girl I used to be. My name was called. The court officer's voice echoed through the crowded room, making me pause for a moment. I stood up, my legs shaking slightly, the thought, can I do it? Lingering in my mind. But then I stepped forward, feeling strangely small and strong. In the dock, I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from shaking too much. Each question from June helped me regain my composure. I recounted everything I had seen and heard about the times Melody had been prevented from seeing her, about the irregularities in the legal documents, about the pain of knowing the truth had been twisted by those I loved most. I didn't add anything, just tried to be sincere. When I mentioned the overlapping timelines, the missing signatures, I saw my mother's eyes widen, her lips purse. In the final moments of my testimony, I looked straight into my mother's eyes. Those eyes contained everything: surprise, disappointment, fear, anger, and even a hint of resignation. I realized that from today on, my relationship with my mother would change forever. But I had no regrets. With each word I spoke, I was gradually shedding the shell I had worn for so long, returning to myself full of imperfections, full of fear, but for the first time truly free. When I finished testifying, I left the stand. Melody looked at me with a warm, tearful gaze. June nodded. You did great. I turned around and caught a glimpse of Evelyn, her face turned away, her hands clutching her purse until they were white. As for Mom, she sat motionless, except for her hands that were shaking slightly. I walked out of the courtroom, my legs still shaking. The sky outside was still gray, but not as heavy as it had been this morning. I felt like I had just emerged from a long shadow, though I knew there would be more storms ahead. June came to me, her voice whispering but determined. "This isn't over yet. They'll fight harder from now on. Get ready, Lauren." I nodded. Suddenly, I thought, sometimes courage isn't about winning or losing, it's about just showing up and not backing down, no matter who's watching. Today, I chose the truth, and no matter what happens next, I know I won't go back. After every storm, there is a strange silence, a silence that can sometimes be more painful than the screaming or the arguing. That night, I sat alone in my small apartment, watching the city outside the window, lights glinting on the rain-soaked pavement. The air in the house felt heavy and stagnant. My phone glowed, filled with unread messages. Every time I saw my mother's or Evelyn's name, my heart skipped a beat. Evelyn was the one who texted the most, first a series of half-pleading, half-blaming messages. "Why did you do that, Lauren? You have no idea how sad it made Mom." Then the next lines turn angry, even accusatory. "I don't think you would betray your bloodline. Does family mean nothing to you? Only Melody?" I finished reading, quietly put the phone down on the table, and didn't reply. Every word Evelyn sent was like a new scratch on an old wound, a reminder that from now on I was truly an outsider in my own family story. Before I could even let out my exhaustion, I received a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was cold and solemn, as if trying to hold on to her last dignity. "I just want to say, your decision today will change everything. I hope you can live in peace with your choice. Family always comes first, but you have excluded yourself from that." I listened to it over and over again, not crying, not getting angry. What I felt most clearly at that moment was emptiness, as if a door had just slammed shut in my heart. No more shared laughter, no more Sunday dinners, no more hugs, though awkward, but still warm and familiar. Luckily, Edith appeared, as if she knew exactly when I needed a hand to hold. She brought a pot of hot soup, the aroma filling the kitchen, soothing the chill of the rainy night outside. "You did the right thing, Lauren," Edith said, looking straight at me. "No one has the right to make you bear the pain of an entire family, just to get a false sense of security." I chuckled weakly, took the bowl of soup, and felt my heart soften somewhat. Sometimes I think if only things could be easier. Easy is not true. Edith shook her head. Only facing the truth is the path of adulthood. Melody also texted, short but sincere. "Thank you, Lauren. I know there are many challenges ahead, but thanks to you, I am no longer alone." She didn't linger long, because we both understood things were just beginning. When Edith left, the apartment was quiet again. I looked toward the bedroom, where Harper and Miles were already asleep. The rain outside seemed to have faded, a gentle soundtrack to my restless thoughts. I picked up my phone, opened my messaging app, and scrolled down to the family group, an old symbol of the days when we all sent good mornings, shared dinner photos, and sometimes just a few small stories. Tonight, I hit delete. There was nothing left to hold on to. There was no more role to play. As soon as I put the phone down, Harper poked her head out of the room, eyes half closed, and asked in a small voice, "Will I get to see my mother every day now?" I went to my son, gently hugged Harper, and put the storm behind me. "I promise, things will be different from now on. Maybe not right away, but I will try so you don't have to wait anymore." That night, I lay awake for a long time. A question kept swirling in my mind. What is the price of the truth? And am I really willing to pay that price? Thinking back on all the years of keeping silent just to keep the peace, I suddenly understood that the price of silence was much more expensive. It eroded little by little what was real inside me, turning me into a shadow in my own life. Now, I may have lost the comfortable circle I once had, but I know that at least I made the right choice for myself, for Melody, for Harper, and for Miles. The truth doesn't come immediately. It hurts. It's lonely. But in that pain, I realize that I'm still whole. Children often know more than we think. They quietly observe, listen, and then suddenly ask a question that catches us off guard, and sometimes breaks our hearts. That's what I learned after spending time with Harper and Miles, while I myself was struggling to relearn how to listen and respond with the gentlest truth possible. That day, the spring sun was shining brightly through the treetops of the city park. Melody and I sat on a wooden bench, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the two children running around the slide area. Harper ran quickly, her cheeks rosy, while Miles was more reserved, only daring to sit on the steps and watch his sister. The sounds of children mixed with the chirping of birds, creating a rare peaceful scene amidst the turmoil of adults. Melody turned to me, her eyes filled with gratitude and fatigue. I don't know how I would get through this without you. There are times when I think, if only things were as simple as when children play outside. I smiled, took her hand, and felt the fragile but genuine connection between two women, both mothers and women trying to heal themselves. Harper ran back, panting, eyes sparkling. Lauren, will I live with my mom every day now? Or just on weekends? Melody bit her lip, tears welling up in her eyes, and I was momentarily at a loss for words. Looking into Harper's hopeful eyes, I was reminded of my own childhood, of being excluded from the adult conversations I wanted to understand so much. I didn't want Harper to feel that way, of being lost in a world of people who made decisions for her. I sat down at eye level with the girl and gently replied, I'm not sure things will change right away, but both me and your mother are trying our best to keep you with me as much as possible. Sometimes adults have to wait for a decision from the court, but I promise, no one will abandon you. Harper was silent for a moment, then wrapped her arms around me. The hug was tight, and I knew I had just given away a small but precious bit of hope. Melody quietly wiped away her tears, pulled Harper into her arms, and whispered, I love you so much, Harper. I will never give up on you too. In that moment, I suddenly realized family is not only those who share the same blood, but also those who know how to listen, know how to embrace each other's pain without judgment, without abandoning. Miles also trotted over at this time, nestled close to me, and suddenly looked up and asked, Mom, what are we eating today? Melody and I both froze. I tried to correct him, but instead just stroked Miles's hair silently, and neither of us said anything else. I felt a strange feeling inside me, a sharp pain, yet a gentle one. Perhaps for children, love and safety are the most important things, regardless of who calls them mother or aunt. The atmosphere was quiet for a moment, until Melody spoke up, her voice whispering, The final hearing will be soon, sister. Evelyn's lawyer has sent you a subpoena for cross-examination. They won't let it go easily. I nodded, feeling the weight on my shoulders again. But this time, I wasn't as scared as before. My experiences had taught me that healing is a winding journey. Sometimes it feels like you've come a long way, then you have to come back to where you started. Especially for children, every change in adulthood is a scratch. Even if it doesn't bleed, it still hurts. I had to be strong not only for myself, but also for Harper and Miles, for Melody, and for the wounded parts of myself as a child. Melody squeezed my hand. No matter what happens, I will be grateful to you forever. As long as you stand by me, everything will be fine. I watched the two children play, my heart filled with love and determination. The children asked simple questions, but each answer was a stitch to the nameless wounds of adults. I told myself I will try to respond with all the gentleness I can, so that the road ahead, though bumpy, will still be full of hope. I used to think family was something that was unchangeable, blood, bonds that could not be broken no matter how angry or distant. But the more I grew up, the more I went through the storms, the more I understood. Sometimes you find family in the places you least expect. Sometimes you have to build it yourself from the broken pieces of faith, of pain, of love that suddenly comes from people who are not related by blood. Edith once said something very gentle to me that I will always remember. Blood makes us related, Lauren, but love makes us family. You made the right choice. That sentence kept ringing in my head all afternoon as I prepared tomato meatballs according to my mother's old recipe in Melody's kitchen. Now a familiar haven for me, Melody, the two kids and friends who were not related by blood, but were as close as real family. It was a potluck dinner. Everyone brought a dish, each with a story, a memory. Edith contributed Southern egg salad. Dana, an immigration attorney I'd met through a case for Melody, brought ham sandwiches with her mother's secret sauce from New Jersey. Laughter filled the kitchen, the chairs mismatched. The table covered with an old checkered tablecloth was always filled with plates and fragrant food. Harper and Miles were playing and then tired, and they rested their heads on my shoulder without realizing it, and Melody kept looking at her and then at me, her eyes full of gratitude. Edith sat and recounted stories from her youth, about the times she ran away to do what she wanted, about the first time she told her mother that she was going to live my own life. Dana kept joking about her own family drama, about how her mother had threatened to disown her if she married a foreigner, and then still grinned as she brought her son-in-law home for Thanksgiving. As I brought out the meatballs, the kitchen filled with the aroma of tomato sauce, I suddenly realized that there was a nostalgia for my mother mixed in with this joy. Even when we are far apart, there are things that cannot be erased, like the sweet taste of long-cooked tomatoes, like the sound of spoons hitting plates during a family dinner. Melody raised her glass of water, her voice deep and firm. For those who showed up, stayed, and dared to overcome their fears to find each other. For the family we chose. I laughed, clinked glasses with everyone, and felt a strange connection rise inside me, a very real hope that, despite the many hardships ahead, I would no longer be alone. Family is not just where you were born, but also where you were chosen, loved, and allowed to be yourself. The dinner was filled with laughter, candlelight, and gentle greetings. Harper and Miles fell asleep on my shoulders, breathing evenly, their faces as peaceful as if all the storms outside had never touched them. I sat still, savoring the feeling, a rare, warm moment after months of darkness. Just then the doorbell rang. I gently laid Miles down on the couch and ran to open the door. A smiling courier handed me a thick envelope, clearly marked with a court seal. It was an official summons requiring me to appear in court for my final hearing. Hope and excitement surged through me at the same time. I turned back to the table, letter in hand, looking at the familiar faces watching me, Edith nodding, Dana patting my shoulder, Melody squeezing my hand. I knew that, no matter what tomorrow brought, I had found a new kind of family here. A family that was imperfect, inconsistent, but genuine, warm, and willing to protect each other. That night, I sat by the window, watching the city lights up, feeling grateful and strong. Life can sometimes give you unexpected losses, but it can also give you opportunities to rebuild, to redefine the meaning of the word family. There are times when you think you know your limits, how much you can endure, how much you can let go. But life, especially with the people you love the most, has a way of pushing you further than you ever imagined. And at some point, those seemingly strong boundaries are tested to the limit. I still remember the first time I dared to say no to my mother when I was a teenage girl, still naively believing that if I had the courage, I would be heard. That day, I refused to attend a family gathering, telling her straight out that I was too tired and wanted to stay home alone. The result was a week of heavy silence. My mother did not look at me, did not answer me even a single sentence. I have learned to step back since then, to let things be, even when I disagreed. But now, after all that has happened, I realize the retreat of the past only made me lose my way in my own home. Even today, when I received the phone call saying that my mother was hospitalized for a heart attack, I still could not help but feel a vague fear. I felt sorry for my mother, but also felt that something in my heart had changed. The local hospital was cold and bright, the pale white hallway lights casting long, uneasy shadows. I walked into the waiting room, the steady sound of the heart monitor in the distance. Evelyn was there, her face blank, her eyes red from crying too much. When she saw me, she rushed over, her cold hands grabbing my shoulders. "Lauren, you have to think again. Please, Mom is very weak. If you take back your statement, everything will be okay. Mom will be well again. Our family will be the same again." I looked at her, my heart aching, but I firmly shook my head. Evelyn continued, her voice broken with sobs. "Don't you love your mother? Do you know how many nights she cried because of this? I know she's not perfect, but I beg you, Lauren, just this once, for her sake." I tried to stay calm. Every word was like a knife cutting into my heart. But I knew I couldn't go back to the old path. "I love you too, Evelyn. But loving you doesn't mean lying. I can't keep living in this cycle, can't keep hiding the truth just to keep everyone feeling okay." At the end of the hallway, Melody appeared, holding a cup of hot coffee. She gently placed her hand on my back, giving me a reassuring look of support. At that moment, just that look was enough to make me feel like I wasn't alone. The door to the hospital room opened slightly. A nurse called us in. My mother lay on the bed, her face pale, but her eyes still filled with the familiar controlling gaze. When she saw me, she smiled weakly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Evelyn sat by the bed, holding my mother's hand. I sat down next to the bed, trying to speak as gently as possible. "Mom, I came here because I care about you. I just want you to be healthy. I don't want our family to suffer any more pain." My mother looked straight into my eyes. A flash of anger appeared, then faded into vague pain. "Are you really going to leave me, Lauren? After all I've done for you?" I was silent, feeling the separation that could not be mended. She continued, "Will you ever come back to this family? Or will you always be an outsider?" I held my mother's hand, feeling her cold, time-wrinkled skin. I couldn't promise to come back, couldn't promise to live like before, but I couldn't bear to turn my back completely. "Mom, I will always be your child. But I also have to be myself. I can't go back to things that are no longer true. I still love you, I still love my sister, but I have to live true to myself." My mother burst into tears, her sobs muffled in the room filled with the smell of antiseptic and the tension in the air. Evelyn burst into tears too, clutching me tightly. "I'm sorry, I was so selfish." I hugged her, feeling the hot tears on my shoulder. Melody stood silently at the door, waiting for me to come out. I left the hospital room and walked down the deserted hallway. It was raining outside, drops pattering on the window panes. I took a deep breath, feeling the fresh evening air, hoping to dispel the mixed emotions in my heart. My phone buzzed. A notification popped up, a reminder of my final court date. In just a few days, everything would change forever. I looked up at the gray sky, my heart heavy but as strong as ever. This was a turning point. My boundaries had been tested, but this time, I didn't back down. I knew that compassion doesn't mean betraying yourself. Sometimes, true love is daring to say no to save what's left for yourself, for others, and for the children waiting for a safer home. There are days when you have to dress like you're going to war, even if all you're doing is telling the truth. Today was one of those days. I stood in front of my closet, choosing my simplest dark dress, my hands shaking as I buttoned it. Looking in the mirror, I tried to calm myself, telling myself, just tell the truth, no matter what. Outside, the sky was cold and gray, and the wind blew through the windows, carrying the earthy scent of late spring. I drove to the county courthouse, my mind racing with a mixture of fear, determination, and regret. I never imagined that I would one day be the main witness in a lawsuit involving my own family, and I never imagined that telling the truth would be so difficult. The courtroom was packed that day, the atmosphere tense as a string. Melody sat in the plaintiff's row, her eyes anxious but hopeful. June, her lawyer, led me through the rows, gently squeezed my shoulder, and whispered, "Just say what you saw and heard. Sometimes justice is silent. Lauren, it looks like paperwork, not fireworks." Harper and Miles were left with a babysitter in the hallway, but I could hear them whispering and giggling behind the glass. Evelyn sat in the defendant's row, her face tense, her eyes red from lack of sleep. My mother, Nancy, sat silently, her hands clutching the edge of her bag, not saying a word, but her eyes never leaving mine for a second. When the clerk called my name to the witness stand, my steps felt heavy. I sat down, took a deep breath, and began answering June's questions. She led me gently, about what I'd seen over the past months, about how Melody had been cut off from her child, about the irregularities in the paperwork, about how Harper and Miles missed their mother, and how they'd changed when they saw Melody again. I recounted every detail, though my hands were cold and my voice faltered at times. I did not embellish or soften. Just the truth, raw, and sometimes more painful than lies. Evelyn kept her eyes on guard, occasionally turning away. Nancy sat still, her face as if petrified, only her eyes moving constantly, filled with nameless emotions. When Evelyn's lawyers came to cross-examine me, they tried to sow doubt in my testimony, asking about Melody's past, about my post-miscarriage mood swings, about whether I had any bias. I listened to each question, calmly answering each detail, never once evading. I knew this moment wasn't just for Melody. For Harper and Miles, it was for me, for the old me who had been silent out of fear. Melody presented the evidence, unanswered letters, copies of documents, photos of secret meetings with her son, the results of psychological assessments by doctors, and testimony from those close to her. She told of the long nights waiting for her son, of the pain of being left out when she just wanted to be a mother. June summarized all the evidence in a concise, clear manner. No flowery words, no tears, just the facts. Finally, the judge sat pensively, his hands clasped together, his eyes looking at each person in turn. The air in the room seemed to freeze, except for the light tapping of a fountain pen on the table. Based on the evidence and testimony, I make the following ruling. Melody Reeves is awarded full physical custody of Harper and Miles. Evelyn Reeves will be granted supervised visitation. Witness Lauren's testimony helped clarify the facts of the case. I breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time, an indescribable feeling of sadness welled up in my heart. I looked at Melody. She burst into tears and rushed forward to hug me tightly. "You saved us, Lauren. I don't know how to thank you." I just squeezed her shoulder, feeling both relieved and heavy. I knew this was not a pure victory. There was no applause, no bright smiles from all the family members. Nancy stood silently outside the door, her eyes sad, disappointed, and perhaps also a little relieved that everything was over. Evelyn did not look at me once, just bowed her head and walked quickly away. Leaving the courthouse, the spring air was strangely clear. Melody hugged me for a long time, tears still lingering in her eyes. June also patted my shoulder, her eyes warm but stern. "Lauren, today you did something few people dare to do. Remember, the truth may not make anyone happy right away, but it will help people heal in the end." I looked back at the courthouse, then at the people waiting for me outside. This victory was not easy, not complete, but I knew I had made the right choice. I had stood on the side of truth, the side of children, the side of compassion, and not betrayed myself. On the way home, I felt both relieved and empty. I wondered, what does true healing look like now? Maybe it doesn't happen overnight. Maybe it's a long journey where each brave decision, each honest word, each boundary setting is a small step toward peace. That night, sitting by the window, I thought about my old family, about my mother, about Evelyn, about the old memories. I still loved them, but now I loved myself more. I knew that tomorrow would be a new day, and I was strong enough to move forward, even though there were many challenges ahead. Some say freedom is the sweetest thing a person can attain. But sometimes, when it comes, it brings with it an unexpected void. Like the first time I was alone after my divorce, many years ago, sitting on my old sofa in a brand new apartment, I realized I didn't know what to do with all the space, time, and silence I had craved. At that time, I just breathed, long breaths, learning to be my friend. And now that feeling is back, but this time lighter and more hopeful. After the trial, things moved slowly, as if life were testing me to see if I was truly ready for a new chapter. Melody rented a small house just a few blocks from my apartment. On moving day, Edith and Dana and I went to help. The early summer sky was blue, and Harper and Miles ran around the lawn, playing with cardboard boxes and old blankets. There was something so pure, so peaceful, as if every wound in my heart was slowly healing under the sunlight and children's laughter. Inside the house, Melody fussed with the dishes, occasionally turning to look at me, smiling gratefully. "I don't know how to thank you, Lauren. Without you, I would never have gotten to start over like this." I just smiled, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and gently replied, "We got through it together, Melody. You and the kids gave me the chance to grow up again." That evening, Edith and Dana invited everyone to the community garden, where we hadn't had a proper meal together in a long time. Edith brought a basket of fresh bread, Dana prepared an Italian salad, and I baked a simple apple pie, my mother's old recipe, which I now found myself making not for her, but for myself and the people I had chosen to call family. We spread out a blanket on the picnic table, the late afternoon sun filtering through the trees, the kids running around playing with ladybugs and tiny flowers. Melody, for the first time in a long time, smiled freely. I looked around, realizing that family can truly thrive in unexpected places, under the open sky, around an uncoordinated table, in small stories and warm hugs. As everyone left, Melody pulled me back and hugged me for a long time. "I know it will be difficult, but I believe that from now on my children will be able to live with the love they deserve." Harper and Miles waved at me, cheeks flushed with sunshine and joy. I felt strangely light. As night fell, I returned to my apartment, opened the balcony door, and breathed in the cool air of my first real summer of freedom. I sat quietly on the chair, cup of tea in my hand, letting all the sounds of the city fade into the peaceful silence around me. I thought about what I had been through, about the pain, the betrayal, the struggle, and the courage. All of it had brought me to this moment, alone but no longer lonely, free but no longer empty. As I began to close my eyes, letting my thoughts settle, the doorbell rang. Under the carpet was an envelope, in my mother's familiar handwriting. "If you want to talk, the door is always open." I held the letter in my hands and sat quietly for a long time. There was no anger left in my heart, only a gentle sadness and a deep gratitude. I knew that healing would not happen overnight, nor would it come from a court hearing or a family dinner, but from small steps, from each choice to forgive, each moment of daring to be true to myself. I smiled and said softly to myself, I deserve this peace. Family is not something given to me, but something I choose to build. I know that tomorrow and the days after, I will continue to learn how to fill that freedom with love, honesty, and courage for myself and for those around me. Some say that true healing is not about letting go of the past, but about choosing what to carry forward. That Sunday morning, I woke up with a strange sense of relief, as if I had just dropped a heavy backpack after a long journey. In the kitchen, sunlight streamed through the windows, casting soft golden streaks on the table. I turned on the radio, soft jazz playing, mixed with the smell of freshly baked waffles from the oven. This quiet, I once thought was a luxury that I would never have. I put down my coffee cup and opened the envelope on the table. It was my mother's familiar handwriting, Nancy's. The letter was short, but full of things that had never been said out loud. Lauren, I know I haven't always been right. I'm sorry for the times I didn't listen, didn't understand, or hurt you. My door is always open if you're willing. I love you. Nancy. I folded the letter and held it in my hand for a long time. Many emotions rose in my heart. Gratitude, sadness, relief, and a little regret that things would probably never be the same again. I didn't rush to call my mother. I understood that forgiveness didn't mean going back to where I was, but choosing to move forward more gently. There was a knock on the door. Melody and her 2 children, Harper and Miles, rushed in, carrying the scent of sunshine and a box full of blueberries picked from the community garden. Melody smiled and handed me one of Harper's drawings, brightly colored, in clumsy childish handwriting and written on it. Our family, Aunt Lauren, Mom Melody, Harper, Miles, Aunt Edith, and Dana. I choked up and hugged Harper, tears welling up in my eyes, not because of sadness, but because I realized that true family is not necessarily those who share the same blood, but those who choose to be together, care for and love each other unconditionally. Breakfast that morning was simple yet heartwarming. Golden waffles, syrup oozing from the plates, children's laughter echoing throughout the room. Melody poured me a cup of tea, her eyes sparkling with joy. We've come a long way, Lauren. Do you feel like you're finally home? I just nodded, smiling for a long time. Just then, the phone rang. Edith was calling from another state, her voice excited. Good Sunday, everyone. I baked pumpkin bread today using my old recipe, hope to be back soon to share it with everyone. I shared with everyone the contents of my mother's letter. Melody gently placed her hand on my shoulder. You'll know when you're ready to answer her. Don't rush, Lauren. You deserve to choose your own pace of life. After breakfast, the kids rolled around on the floor playing with blocks. I cleaned up and sat down to write a few lines in my diary. I'm not being selfish in choosing peace. I'm just protecting what I've lost for so long, my self-respect, my belief in myself, and my right to be happy. The climax came as gently as a sudden hug. Harper ran over, wrapped her arms around me, and whispered softly in my ear. Thanks for taking us home, Miss Lauren. I held her for a long time, feeling the warmth and absolute trust of a child who had gone through many storms. I realized, at that moment, my heart was truly at peace for the first time in many years. Breakfast over, Melody packed up. The kids got ready to go to the park. I stood in the doorway, watching them leave, feeling my heart filled with hope. I no longer feared loneliness, because I knew, even though my biological family might not be complete, I had created a new home for myself, where old wounds could be healed with honesty and courage. I smiled at the sunlight outside the window and said to myself, for the first time, I don't need anyone's permission to be happy. I don't know what the future holds. I'm not sure if all the cracks will completely disappear. But I do know that, from today on, I will always choose peace for myself every day, and that is the greatest gift I can give to myself, to the people I love. Hi everyone, I am Lauren, the one who has had the opportunity to tell this story from my heart and experience. After a long journey with many ups and downs, I truly believe that happiness does not always lie in predetermined things, but sometimes it is the result of daring to stand up and choose peace and love for myself. Perhaps the most haunting thing for me throughout this journey is the realization that families are not always perfect, but everyone has the right to define and build their own home. Forgiveness, compassion, and the courage to change are the keys to healing. I have learned that some wounds can only be healed when I am brave enough to let go of the past, not to forget, but to live fully in the present and the future. How about you? Have you ever felt alone among your loved ones? Or have you ever had to make difficult decisions to protect your own peace? If so, please share your feelings and stories in the comments section. Who knows, your experience might be the motivation for someone out there. If you see yourself in this story, or simply want to keep a little lightness and hope for life, don't hesitate to leave comment number 1 or let me know where you are watching from. And if you love everyday, close stories like this, please subscribe to the channel to continue accompanying each other on many more journeys. Thank you for accompanying me throughout 16 chapters, a journey not only mine, but also that of many people who are looking for peace, understanding, and a real home. I wish you always be strong, steadfast, and do not forget to choose happiness for yourself. See you again in the upcoming stories.